Hi there. Welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight, we're stepping into the worn leather boots of a medieval knight during the Crusades. Picture this. You're lying on a scratchy straw mattress in a cramped tent somewhere outside Acre, and the morning call to prayer from a nearby minaret mingles with the Latin chanting from your own camp's makeshift chapel. The smell of unwashed bodies, horse dung, and last night's boiled beans hangs heavy in the air, and you realize with a sinking feeling that you haven't had a proper bath in 3 months. Let's be honest, you probably won't survive this journey, but hey, at least you'll die doing something your local priest assured you was holy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Alright, let's begin the story. The first sound that penetrates your consciousness isn't a rooster's crow or birds chirping. It's Brother Marcus ringing that cursed bronze bell, calling everyone to matins. Your eyes crack open in the pre-dawn darkness, and immediately you're aware of the cold that seeped through your woolen blanket during the night. The desert might be scorching during the day, but these Palestinian nights can be surprisingly bitter. You grunt and roll off your pallet, careful not to wake Sir Geoffrey, who's snoring like a wounded boar next to you. Your first order of business involves the chamber pot, or more accurately, the communal latrine pit that's been dug 50 yards from the tents. Medieval armies didn't exactly prioritize sanitation infrastructure, and historians still debate whether more crusaders died from poor hygiene practices than from Saracen swords. You stumble through the darkness, trying not to trip over tent ropes or sleeping soldiers, all while your bladder screams for relief. The latrine situation is, well, let's just say it makes a modern porta potty look like a 5-star hotel bathroom. It's essentially a long trench with wooden planks laid across it, and the smell could knock a horse unconscious. You do your business as quickly as possible, using a communal stick with a sponge on the end. Yes, communal. That's been soaking in a bucket of vinegar. Some of the wealthier knights brought their own rags, but most make do with whatever's available. Moss, leaves, or smooth stones. One peculiar historical tidbit. Crusading knights sometimes use fragments of broken pottery called pessoi for this purpose, which archaeologists have found etched with the names of their enemies. Talk about a passive-aggressive bathroom break. Back at your tent, you splash your face with water from a leather pouch. The water tastes brackish and has floaty bits in it, but it's better than nothing. You can't help but think about the clear streams back home in Normandy as you swish the gritty liquid around your mouth and spit it out. Dental hygiene in the 12th century consists mainly of rubbing your teeth with a rough cloth and maybe some salt if you're lucky. Your breath probably smells like a combination of last night's dinner and impending gum disease. Now comes the morning prayers. You shuffle toward the chapel tent where Father Guillaume is already warming up his Latin. The Mass is mandatory. Skip it and you risk not just eternal damnation, but also very real punishment from your commander. You kneel on the hard ground, the cold seeping through your hose, and mumble along with prayers you've memorized but don't fully understand. Most knights know their Pater Noster and Ave Maria by rote, but the finer points of theology are lost on men who've spent more time training with swords than studying scripture. The irony isn't lost on you. Here you are, supposedly on a holy mission to reclaim Jerusalem for Christendom, yet half the army can barely recite the creed properly. Father Guillaume drones on about salvation through service, conveniently glossing over that bit in the Bible about "thou shalt not kill." You catch the eye of young Roland, a knight from Burgundy, who's struggling to stay awake, He mime yawns behind the priest's back, and you have to stifle a laugh. As the Mass concludes with a blessing of the day's endeavours, your stomach growls audibly. The fast before morning Mass always seems longer when you're camped in a war zone, but at least you've survived another night without dysentery, which is more than poor Sir Aldrich can say. He's been confined to the medical tent for 3 days now, expelling his insides from both ends. You stand, knees creaking from the cold ground, and prepare to face another day of this grand adventure. The sun is just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and pink. For a brief moment, it's almost beautiful, until someone empties a chamber pot nearby and reality comes crashing back. The breakfast horn sounds across camp, and you join the stream of hungry knights heading toward the cooking fires. Your stomach feels like it's eating itself. A familiar sensation after months of irregular meals and questionable rations. The smell of smoke mingles with something that might charitably be called food, though back home you'd probably feed it to the pigs. You queue up with your wooden bowl. Yes, you eat from the same unwashed bowl every day, and watch the camp cooks ladling out this morning's feast. The main course is a greyish porridge made from barley and whatever grains the quartermaster managed to procure from local merchants. It has the consistency of wallpaper paste and tastes about as appetizing. Floating in it are chunks of salted pork that's been travelling with the army so long, it's developed its own ecosystem. The meat has that telltale greenish sheen that means it's right on the edge of being edible. But when you're this hungry, you'll eat anything that won't actively kill you. The bread situation is equally grim. What passes for a loaf could double as a weapon. Rock-hard crust surrounding an interior that's somehow both stale and damp. You've learned to dunk it in your wine, watered down, of course, to soften it enough that you won't crack a tooth. Speaking of teeth, you've already lost 2 since leaving France. And the camp barber surgeon's idea of dental care involves pliers and a strong arm. Wine for breakfast might sound decadent, but it's purely practical. The water in these parts will give you the flux faster than you can say Deus vult, so everything gets mixed with alcohol. Even then, you're playing digestive roulette. The wine is sour and has bits floating in it, probably dead flies, though you've learned not to look too closely. Some mornings they have ale instead, which tastes like someone fermented old boots but at least provides some calories. On special occasions, like after a successful raid, you might get eggs. Where these eggs come from is a mystery best left uninvestigated. They could be from chickens, ducks, or possibly some local bird species you'd rather not think about. They're usually served hard-boiled because it's the only way to ensure they won't give you food poisoning. Well, probably won't. The preserved fish is another breakfast staple that tests your commitment to the cause. Dried and salted within an inch of its life, it has the texture of leather and a smell that could wake the dead. You gnaw on it like a dog with a bone, trying to extract some nutritional value while your taste buds scream in protest. The Venetian merchants who sold it to the army probably laughed all the way to their counting houses. You overhear Sir Benedict complaining about the food. Again, he's from a wealthy family and brought his own provisions, including exotic spices and preserved fruits. The rest of you hate him a little bit for it, especially when he pulls out a precious orange and eats it in front of everyone like it's no big deal. Historians still argue about whether citrus fruits were commonly available to Crusaders or if they were a luxury item. All you know is that you'd commit a minor sin for a bite of that orange. The morning meal also serves as a social hour of sorts. Knights cluster in groups based on nationality, social status, or simply who snores the least. You settle in with your usual crowd, a mix of minor nobles and landless younger sons seeking fortune and salvation in equal measure. The conversation revolves around the usual topics: who's got dysentery, who lost at dice last night, and wild speculation about when you'll actually see some fighting. "Heard from the Templars that we're moving out tomorrow," says Robert, a knight from Anjou who's perpetually optimistic despite all evidence to the contrary. He tears off a chunk of bread with his teeth, grimacing at the effort required. "You said that last week," you remind him, washing down a particularly chewy piece of mystery meat with a gulp of wine. "This time it's different. They say Saladin's forces are massing to the north." Saladin. Even the name sends a mix of fear and excitement through the camp. The great Muslim leader has become almost mythical in the Crusaders' imagination, part boogeyman, part worthy adversary. Some of the older knights who faced him before speak with grudging respect about his tactical genius and honourable conduct. Others paint him as a devil incarnate. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. Your breakfast is interrupted by a commotion near the supply wagons. Apparently, someone caught a local trying to sell the quartermasters a batch of fresh meat that was anything but. The peculiar reality of crusading is that you're dependent on the very people you're supposedly here to fight. Local Christian and Muslim merchants alike are happy to sell to anyone with coin, though they save their worst goods for the foreign invaders. Can't really blame them for that. You finish the last of your porridge, using a piece of bread to mop up the remaining gruel. Waste not, want not, as your mother used to say, though she probably never imagined you'd be applying that wisdom to eating suspicious meat porridge in the Holy Land. Your stomach gurgles ominously, but that's just part of the morning routine now. Everyone's digestive system is in constant revolt. As you return your bowl to the pile, it'll get a cursory rinse before the next meal. You notice the sun climbing higher. The comfortable cool of dawn is already giving way to the oppressive heat that makes wearing armor feel like being slowly cooked in an iron pot. But first, you need to visit the armor tent. Time to transform from a smelly, poorly fed human into a smelly, poorly fed killing machine wrapped in 60 pounds of metal. You make your way to the armouring tent, where your Squire Thomas is already waiting with your equipment laid out on a worn carpet. The boy is 14, eager as a puppy, and constantly asking when he'll get to see real combat. You don't have the heart to tell him that when it comes, he'll wish he'd stayed home apprenticing as a blacksmith like his father wanted. The process of getting into full armour is like a twisted medieval version of getting dressed for prom. Except instead of looking good in photos, you're preparing to not die from sword wounds. It starts with the padded garments, the acqueton or gambison, which is essentially a quilted jacket stuffed with raw wool or horsehair. After months of wear and sweat, yours smells like a combination of wet dog and fermented despair. The padding is crucial though. Without it, your mail would chafe your skin raw within minutes. "Arms up, my lord," Thomas says, and you comply, letting him pull the gambison over your head. The thing weighs about 10 pounds on its own and immediately starts trapping your body heat. You're already beginning to sweat, and you haven't even gotten to the metal bits yet. Next comes the mail hauberk, and this is where things get interesting. The chainmail weighs around 30 pounds and consists of thousands of tiny iron rings linked together. Putting it on is like trying to wrestle with a very heavy, very jingly metal fishing net. Thomas struggles to lift it high enough, and you have to bend forward, letting the weight settle across your shoulders. The mail flows down your body like the world's least comfortable dress, reaching to about mid-thigh. "Did you oil the rings like I showed you?" you ask. noticing some rust spots near the armpit. Maintenance is constant in this climate, between the humidity from the coast and the sweat from your body. Rust is your armor's biggest enemy after Saracen weapons. Yes, my lord, but the oil merchant tried to sell us olive oil mixed with sheep fat. Said it was special armor oil blessed by a bishop. You snort. The local merchants have quickly learned that desperate crusaders will buy anything if you attach the word blessed to it. Last week, someone was selling holy water from the Jordan River. That was definitely just taken from a well outside camp. Still, you make a mental note to check the links more carefully tonight. A rusty ring that breaks in battle means a blade finding flesh. The mail coif goes on next. Essentially, a chainmail hood that covers your head and neck. It's lined with leather, thank God. Or it would pull your hair out by the roots. Even so, after a few hours of wear, you'll have an impressive collection of painful pressure points where the rings dig into your skull. Some knights have started wearing padded caps underneath, though the extra layer means even more heat build-up. Now for the plate additions, because apparently 30 pounds of chainmail isn't enough protection. Your knees get cops, metal knee guards. Your elbows get cooters, and your shins get shin balls. Each piece has to be buckled and tied in place with leather straps that Thomas fumbles with while you try to stand still. The leather is stiff and cracked from the desert heat, and one of the buckles is held on with a piece of wire since the original broke 3 weeks ago. The surcoat goes over everything, a sleeveless cloth garment that supposedly identifies you as a Christian knight and provides some protection from the sun. In reality, it's a sweat trap that turns your armor into a walking oven. Yours once displayed your family's colors proudly. Now it's a sun-bleached, stained mess that looks more brown than blue. The white cross sewn on the front is grey with dirt, which seems ironically appropriate for this whole enterprise. The gauntlets, my lord? Thomas holds up your mail mittens, which are attached to leather gloves. Your hands will be sweating pools within minutes, but bare hands in battle means lost fingers. The mittens make fine motor control nearly impossible. Try picking up a dropped coin while wearing oven mitts and you'll get the idea. Finally, the helmet. Yours is a newer style with a face guard that can be raised, which seemed like a luxury when you bought it, but now feels like a necessity. The older barrel helms turn your head into a reverberating echo chamber, where your own breathing sounds like a windstorm. The padding inside is compressed and smells like something died in there, which, given the previous owner's fate, might not be far from the truth. Fully armored now, you take a few experimental steps. The weight is distributed across your body, but it's still like carrying a small person on your back. Your range of motion is limited. Reaching above your head is difficult. And forget about scratching any itches that develop, and they will develop. There's a spot on your lower back that's been driving you crazy for days, completely unreachable once you're suited up. How do I look? You ask Thomas, who grins with misplaced hero worship. Like a true knight of Christ, my lord. You catch your reflection in a polished shield, propped against the tent wall. What stares back is a walking pile of metal and cloth, face obscured, humanity hidden under layers of protection. You look like every other armored figure in camp, anonymous, interchangeable, ready to kill or be killed in the name of God. Historians debate whether the weight of armor significantly impacted knights' fighting ability. What they miss is that it's not just the weight, it's the heat, the restricted vision, the way it changes your balance and exhausts you before you even reach the battlefield. Modern experiments with replica armor in air-conditioned museums don't capture the reality of wearing this stuff in the Middle Eastern sun while suffering from mild malnutrition and chronic diarrhea. A horn sounds from the command tent. Time for the morning assembly, where you'll learn today's marching orders or siege duties. You clank your way out of the armoring tent, already feeling streams of sweat running down your back. The sun is fully up now, beating down with an intensity that makes you nostalgic for rainy days in France. "Don't forget your sword, my lord," Thomas calls, running after you with your weapon. Right, the actual tool of your trade, almost forgotten in the ordeal of getting dressed. You buckle it on, adding another 8 pounds to your ensemble. The sword represents your status, your purpose, your identity as a knight. It's also one more thing to weigh you down on what promises to be another scorching day in the Holy Land. The assembly horn has barely finished echoing across camp when you join the stream of armoured figures converging on the parade ground. Your mail jingles with each step, creating a metallic symphony with hundreds of other knights doing the same shuffle walk that armour forces upon its wearers. The morning sun glints off helmets and spear points, creating a dazzling display that would be impressive if you weren't already sweating through your gamson. Lord Commander Raymond de Toulouse stands on a makeshift platform, his banner hanging limp in the still air. He's a hard man who lost an eye fighting in Anatolia and never lets anyone forget it. The empty socket is uncovered this morning, a power move that makes younger knights uncomfortable. You take your place in formation with the other knights of your status, not important enough to stand at the front, not lowly enough to be shoved to the back where you can't hear anything. "Brothers in Christ," Raymond bellows, his voice carrying across the assembled army. "Today we march for Tiberias. Intelligence suggests Saladin's forces are moving to intercept. We leave within the hour." A ripple of excitement and dread passes through the ranks. Finally, movement after weeks of sitting. But marching in full armour under the Palestinian sun is its own form of torture. You've done it before. 15 miles that felt like 50. Every step a struggle against exhaustion and heat. The logistics of moving a Crusader army are staggering. You're not just walking from point A to point B. You're part of a massive, creaking war machine that includes thousands of men-at-arms, servants, camp followers, supply wagons, siege equipment, and enough horses to populate a small county. The order of march is strictly regulated by rank and function, and God help you if you're caught out of position. Your place is with the mounted sergeants and minor knights, somewhere in the middle of the column. The great lords with their retinues lead, followed by the military orders, Templars and Hospitallers, who actually know what they're doing. Behind you comes the infantry, poor foot soldiers who have to march in leather and quilted armour if they're lucky, regular clothes if they're not. The baggage train brings up the rear, vulnerable to raids and constantly falling behind. You retrieve your destrier from the horse lines, where the grooms have been struggling to keep the war horses fed and watered. Your mount, unimaginatively named Tempest. Every third war horse seems to be named Tempest. Thunder, or something equally dramatic. Looks about as enthusiastic about the upcoming march as you feel. His coat is dull despite the groom's efforts, and his ribs show more prominently than they did when you left France. The local fodder disagrees with European horses almost as much as the food disagrees with European stomachs. Mounting up in full armour requires assistance. Thomas and another squire basically have to boost you into the saddle, where you land with a metallic crash that makes Tempest sidestep irritably. Once mounted, you're committed. Dismounting without help means risking an embarrassing fall that could damage your armour or, worse, your reputation. The column begins to form with all the efficiency of a drunk man threading a needle. Knights push and jostle for position. Nobody wants to march directly behind the horses, for obvious reasons, and several fights nearly break out over perceived slights to honor. It takes a full 2 hours from the initial horn call before the army actually starts moving, by which time the sun has climbed high enough to turn your armor into a personal furnace. The first mile is almost pleasant. There's something stirring about being part of such a massive force. Banners flying, armor glinting, the rhythmic clop of thousands of hooves. Peasants from nearby villages line the route, some cheering, others watching with the wary eyes of people who've seen armies come and go. You notice they've hidden their daughters and anything valuable. Smart move, considering some of your fellow Crusaders have flexible definitions of Christian charity. By mile 3, reality sets in. The dust kicked up by thousands of feet and hooves creates a choking cloud that coats everything. Your surcoat, which started the day relatively clean, is now uniformly brown. The eye slits of your helmet are caked with grit, forcing you to ride with your visor up despite the sun beating directly on your face. You can feel your lips cracking and your tongue turning to leather in your mouth. The pace is maddeningly slow. The column stretches for miles, and every time someone at the front stops, it creates a ripple effect of halts and starts that reaches you 10 minutes later. Your horse walks, stops, walks, stops, in an irregular rhythm that makes it impossible to doze in the saddle, though you try. The constant starting and stopping means you're using muscles to stay balanced that wouldn't normally be engaged, adding another layer of exhaustion to the mix. Water breaks are strictly regulated and never frequent enough. You carry a leather water bottle, but it holds maybe 2 hours worth of water if you're careful. The water wagons are somewhere in the supply train, and getting to them means losing your place in formation. So you ration, taking tiny sips that barely wet your mouth, saving most of it for Tempest who needs it more than you do. The singing starts around noon, when the column needs something to maintain morale. It begins with the Germans. They always start the singing, bellowing out hymns in their guttural language. The French pick it up with their own songs, then the English with theirs. Soon you've got a cacophony of different languages, all singing different songs about God, glory, and killing infidels. Historians often write about Crusader military hymns as displays of religious fervor, but really, it's just something to do besides think about how much your lower back hurts. By early afternoon, the first casualties start dropping out. Heat exhaustion claims knights who pushed too hard, whose armor trapped too much heat, who didn't drink enough water. You see them by the side of the road, squires frantically trying to strip their armor off while someone pours precious water over their heads. The column doesn't stop for them, can't stop, or the whole army would grind to a halt. They'll catch up when they can, or they won't. The afternoon sun reaches its zenith, and the very air seems to shimmer with heat waves rising from the baked earth. You've been marching for 6 hours now, and every part of your body is screaming in protest. The sweat has long since soaked through your gambeson, creating a sloshing, squelching sensation with every movement. Salt crystals have formed on your face where the sweat has evaporated, and your eyes sting constantly from the combination of dust and perspiration. Water discipline becomes a matter of life and death out here. You watch a young knight from Brittany guzzle his entire water supply in one go, desperate for relief. Within an hour, he's swaying in his saddle, and by the second hour, his squire is leading his horse while he slumps forward, semi-conscious. The veterans know better. Small sips, wet your lips, swish and spit if you have to, but never drink deeply until you're sure of the next water source. The column halts at a wadi, a dry riverbed that might have water if you dig deep enough. Engineers and servants immediately set to work with shovels, while the army spreads out in a defensive formation. You dismount, legs trembling as they take your weight, and immediately seek whatever shade you can find. A scraggly acacia tree provides minimal relief, and you cluster with a dozen other knights beneath its sparse branches. "Strip the armor, my lord?" Thomas asks hopefully. He's been walking beside your horse, carrying extra equipment, and looks ready to collapse. "Just the helmet and gauntlets," you reply. The rule is never to be completely unarmored during a march. Saladin's cavalry has a nasty habit of appearing out of nowhere, but the relief of removing even these pieces is indescribable. Your head feels like it might float away without the weight of the helmet, and the air on your sweat-soaked hair is almost cool by comparison. The water parties return with leather buckets of muddy liquid that might charitably be called water. It's brown, gritty, and tastes of earth and animal dung, but it's wet. The horses get served first. A knight without a horse is just an overheated man in expensive metal clothing. You watch Tempest drink deeply, his sides heaving with relief, before taking your own ration. The medical corps, such as it is, deals with the heat casualties. Brother Francis, a hospitaller with some knowledge of physic, moves among the collapsed knights with a grim expression. His treatment consists mainly of getting them into shade, removing armor, and applying wet cloths. For the worst cases, there's bloodletting, based on the medical theory that reducing hot blood will cool the body. You've seen men die faster after bloodletting than they would have from heat alone, but questioning medical knowledge isn't your place. Lost 3 so far. You overhear Brother Francis telling a commander, 2 foot soldiers and Sir Gautier's squire. The boy's heart gave out. God rest his soul. 3 dead, and you haven't even seen an enemy yet. This is the part the songs leave out, how the Holy Land itself is deadlier than any Saracen blade. Historians debate casualty figures from the Crusades, but they often focus on battle deaths. The reality is that disease, heat, and privation kill far more than combat. You're fighting a war of attrition against the land itself. The local guides, Christians who've lived here for generations, shake their heads at your European foolishness. As in this, they travel by night when possible. Rest during the heat of the day. Wear loose robes instead of metal suits. But knightly honor demands you march in full armor, ready for battle at any moment. The guide's practical advice is dismissed as cowardice by commanders who equate suffering with holiness. You notice the Templars handle the heat better than most. Their discipline is admirable, if somewhat inhuman. They march in perfect formation, take water breaks with mechanical precision, and show no signs of the distress that's affecting everyone else. Of course, they've also been out here longer. Their bodies adapted to the climate. Plus, rumor has it they've learned some tricks from the enemy. White robes over armor, special salts added to their water, regulated breathing techniques. But such adaptations smack of going native, so the rest of you suffer in properly Christian fashion. A commotion rises from the Eastern Scouts. Dust clouds on the horizon. Could be anything from a merchant caravan to Saladin's entire army. The alarm ripples through the resting army, and suddenly everyone's struggling back into whatever armor they'd removed. Your hands shake as you fumble with helmet straps, exhaustion making simple tasks difficult. It turns out to be nothing, just a herd of wild camels spooked by something in the desert. The stand-down order comes just as you've finished re-armoring, and you want to scream at the waste of energy. But that's warfare in the Holy Land. Long periods of miserable marching punctuated by false alarms and occasionally, terrifyingly, real combat. The march resumes as the sun begins its descent. The reduced heat is offset by exhaustion. You've been awake since before dawn and in armor for most of it. Your lower back has progressed from aching to screaming, and you've developed saddle sores in places you didn't know could develop sores. Tempest plods along mechanically, head down, all the fire gone out of him. You pass a battlefield from some previous conflict, bleached bones scattered among rusted armor pieces. It's impossible to tell if they were Christian or Muslim. Death has a way of making everyone equal. Some enterprising soldiers break formation to scavenge, looking for usable equipment or valuables. They find mostly rust and disappointment, though one lucky fellow pulls a still serviceable dagger from beneath a rib cage. As evening approaches, scouts report a suitable camping site ahead, a flat area with access to a spring and defensible approaches. The collective sigh of relief is audible. You've made maybe 12 miles today, though it feels like 50. Tomorrow you'll do it again, and the day after that, until you reach wherever Lord Raymond thinks you're going, or until Saladin's forces find you first. The final approach to camp is always the hardest. You can see the advance party setting up tents, starting cooking fires, laying out the familiar pattern of a military camp. Safety and rest are so close, but your body wants to give up now. You grip the saddle horn and focus on staying upright for just a few more minutes. Around you, other knights are doing the same. Proud warriors reduced to exhausted men in metal shells, praying for the moment they can collapse onto their pallets. "Nearly there, my lord," Thomas says encouragingly, though he looks ready to drop himself. You manage a nod, not trusting your parched throat to form words. Nearly there, just a few more steps in this portable oven, and you can rest until tomorrow's march begins the whole ordeal again. The camp materializes around you like a small city arising from the dust. You've done this so many times now that the pattern is automatic. Command tents in the center, knights arranged by nationality and rank in concentric circles. Common soldiers on the periphery, where they'll absorb the first shock of any night attack. Your section is with the other minor nobility from northern France, a corner of familiarity in this alien landscape. Thomas has already claimed your spot and started setting up. The tent is a simple affair. Wooden poles, canvas that's more patches than original material, and just enough room for 2 men to lie down if they don't mind touching. After the palatial estates you grew up in, it's humbling to call this home, but after 12 miles in full armor, it looks like paradise. The process of removing your armor is almost religious in its ritual. Each piece comes off in reverse order from how it went on, and with each removal, you feel a little more human. When Thomas finally lifts the mail hauberk over your head, the relief is so intense you actually groan. Your gambeson underneath is soaked through. You could probably wring out enough sweat to water a small plant. "Shall I air these out, my lord?" Thomas asks, holding your armor pieces at arm's length. The smell is impressive even by Crusader standards. "Do what you can," you tell him, though you both know it's futile. Everything will still be damp come morning, and you'll put it all on again anyway. Such is the glamorous life of a holy warrior. You strip down to your brays and pour a precious cup of water over your head, not caring that you're standing in the middle of camp in your underwear. Modesty is one of the first casualties of campaign life. The water is warm and tastes of leather from the water skin, but it feels like baptism as it runs down your overheated skin. Around you, the camp springs to life with practiced efficiency. Cooking fires bloom like orange flowers in the gathering dusk. Servants and squires scurry about their duties while knights collapse wherever they can find space. The sound of hammering echoes as stakes are driven into the hard ground, a basic defense against cavalry charges that everyone hopes won't come tonight. Your section's designated latrine is already being dug by some unfortunate souls who must have lost at dice. It's positioned downwind and downhill from the sleeping areas, though wind has a way of shifting at the worst possible moments. You make a mental note of its location. Stumbling around in the dark looking for the latrines is a good way to end up relieving yourself in someone's tent, which tends to spark duels. The evening meal preparation begins, and your stomach reminds you that you've eaten nothing since that awful breakfast. Tonight's menu appears to be the same as last night's, a stew of indeterminate meat, root vegetables that have seen better days, and whatever else the cooks can throw into the pot. The smell should be appetizing after a day of marching, but your nose has become too educated about what actually goes into campaign stew. You join the water queue first. Each man gets 1 bucket for drinking, cooking, and washing, in that order of priority. The spring is little more than a seep, and it takes forever to fill each container. Tempers flare as desperate men try to jump the line. You see 2 sergeants come to blows over accusations of taking more than their share, rolling in the dust until their respective knights pull them apart. "The Saracens poison wells," mutters Sir Guillaume. Standing behind you in line, he's one of those knights who sees enemy action in everything. A bird flying overhead is a spy. A change in weather is infidel sorcery. Mark my words, we'll all be shitting our guts out by morning. You've heard the well poisoning stories too. Sometimes they're true. Rotting animal carcasses thrown into water sources is a legitimate tactical move. More often, it's just bad water and poor sanitation making everyone sick. Either way, you'll boil your drinking water tonight if you can get enough fuel for a fire. Back at your tent section, a dice game has already started. Gambling is theoretically forbidden. This is supposed to be a holy pilgrimage, after all. But boredom trumps piety every time. You watch Sir Robert lose his spare boots to a lucky sergeant and decide to keep your few remaining coins safely hidden. The church says gambling is a sin, but apparently, so is everything else enjoyable. And you're already damned for that time with the miller's daughter anyway. Thomas returns with your evening meal, a wooden bowl of the aforementioned stew and a chunk of bread that could serve as a weapon. You eat mechanically, trying not to think too hard about the meat's origins. Could be goat, could be horse, could be that dog that's been following the camp for the last week and suddenly disappeared. Protein is protein when you're burning thousands of calories a day. The social hierarchy of the camp reveals itself at mealtime. The great lords dine in their pavilions on whatever delicacies they've managed to preserve or purchase. You catch a whiff of actual spices from Count Baldwin's tent. The military orders eat in disciplined silence, turning even dinner into a religious observance. Common soldiers make do with whatever they can scrounge, often pooling resources to create communal meals that honestly look more appetizing than what you're eating. As darkness falls, the camp settles into its nighttime routine. Sentries take their positions. Passwords are distributed. Tonight's is St. George, though half the army will forget and try to use last night's Jerusalem. Fires are banked to reduce visibility from a distance, though the smell of thousands of unwashed men probably announces your position clearly enough. You check on Tempest before retiring, finding him hobbled with the other war horses under guard. He's munching on some scraggly grass, looking marginally happier than he did during the march. You pat his neck, checking for cuts or swelling that might lame him tomorrow. A knight without a horse is just an overdressed footman, and replacement mounts are expensive and hard to find. "Good boy," you murmur, and he responds by trying to bite you. Typical. The camp settles into an uneasy quiet, broken by snores, coughs, and the occasional scream from someone having a nightmare. You crawl into your tent, not bothering to wash more thoroughly. What's the point when you'll be filthy again by noon tomorrow? Your pallet is just straw stuffed into rough cloth, but it feels like the finest feather bed after today's ordeal. Thomas is already passed out, curled up like a dog in his corner. You lie on your back, staring at the canvas above, listening to the sounds of 10,000 men trying to rest. Tomorrow will bring another march, another day of dust and heat and exhaustion. But for now, you're horizontal, out of your armor, and relatively safe. In Crusader terms, this counts as luxury. The screaming starts just after midnight, not the usual nightmare screams that punctuate every night in camp, but the raw, agonized shrieks of a man in mortal pain. You jolt awake, hand instinctively reaching for your sword before remembering you're in your tent, not under attack. The screaming continues, joined by urgent shouting and the sound of running feet. "Wounded coming in from a skirmish," someone calls out. "Saracen ambush on the rear guard." You throw on your tunic and stumble out into the darkness. Torches bob like fireflies as men converge on the medical tent, really just a larger canvas structure where Brother Francis and his assistants practice what passes for medicine in this year of our Lord, 1188. The screaming intensifies as you approach, and you see why. A knight is laid out on a rough table, his leg bent at an angle that legs shouldn't bend. White bone juts through torn flesh, and blood pools on the packed earth despite the tourniquet someone has applied. His face is pale as parchment, eyes rolling back in shock. Two men hold him down while Brother Francis examines the wound with the detached interest of a man who's seen too much suffering to be moved by it anymore. "The bone is shattered," he announces. "The leg must come off." Medieval battlefield surgery is not for the faint of heart. There's no anesthesia beyond strong wine mixed with poppy extract if you're lucky. Nothing if you're not. The knight, you recognize him as Sir Theobald from Champagne, is forced to drink deeply from a wineskin while men pile on to hold him still. Brother Francis produces his bone saw, a terrifying implement that's seen enough use to be well worn. "Bite down on this." Someone shoves a leather strap between Theobald's teeth. "And pray," the sawing begins. The sound is worse than the screaming, a rhythmic grinding that sets your teeth on edge. Theobald thrashes despite the men holding him, his muffled shrieks escaping around the leather. Blood sprays in arterial spurts until an assistant manages to clamp the vessels. The smell of iron and fear fills the tent, making your stomach roil despite years of warfare hardening you to such sights. It takes 4 minutes. 4 minutes that feel like hours before the ruined leg falls away, and Brother Francis begins the delicate work of sealing the stump. His method involves heated iron to cauterize the wound. The sizzling of flesh adds a new dimension to the sensory horror. Theobald has mercifully passed out by this point, though his body still twitches with each application of the iron. "Will he live?" asks Theobald's squire, a boy who looks ready to vomit. "If fever doesn't take him, if the wound doesn't putrefy, if he doesn't bleed out in the night, perhaps." Brother Francis replies, already moving to the next casualty, "God will decide." You've seen enough amputations to know Theobald's chances. Maybe 1 in 3 survive the initial surgery. Of those, half succumb to infection within the week. The lucky few who make it home do so as cripples, dependent on family charity or begging outside church doors. This is the glorious crusade the Pope promised would wash away your sins. The medical tent is a production line of horror. Men arrive with arrow wounds, sword cuts, crushing injuries from mace blows. The treatment is brutally simple. Arrow extraction involves probing with dirty fingers or tools, often pushing the infection deeper. Belly wounds are essentially death sentences. Brother Francis doesn't even try with those, just gives them wine and last rites. "Hold him still," a surgeon's assistant calls out as he prepares to extract an arrow from a sergeant's shoulder. The technique involves pushing the arrow completely through if possible, or cutting down to the head if not. No thought is given to nerve damage or muscle preservation. The goal is simply to get the foreign object out before it festers. You watch them work on a young knight with a head wound. His skull is visibly dented from a mace blow, and he keeps vomiting, never a good sign. The treatment? Drilling holes in his skull to release the bad humours. The trepanning drill looks like something from a torturer's kit, and the sound it makes boring through bone is indescribable. Historians debate whether medieval surgeons understood intracranial pressure. All you know is that you've never seen anyone survive this particular treatment. The variety of wounds tells the story of medieval combat. Crushing injuries from maces and war hammers, the go-to weapons for defeating armor. Puncture wounds from arrows finding gaps in mail. Slashing cuts from scimitars, often to the legs where armor is weakest. And always, the secondary infections that kill more surely than the initial injury. "You there," Brother Francis points at you with a bloody hand. "Hold this man down while I reset his shoulder." You find yourself pressed into service, gripping a writhing soldier, while the hospitaller yanks and twists the dislocated joint. The pop when it goes back into place is audible even over the man screaming. At least this one might actually recover. Joint injuries are survivable if infection doesn't set in. The medical supplies are pathetically inadequate. Bandages are reused after dubious washing. Surgical instruments move from patient to patient, with at best a quick wipe on a dirty cloth. The wine used for cleaning wounds is the same stuff you drink, watered down and probably contaminated. Honey is smeared on wounds when available. It actually helps prevent infection, though no one understands why. Some treatments border on the bizarre. You see a man with a persistent fever being bled from multiple points. The theory being that reducing hot blood will cool the body. Another has live maggots placed in a festering wound, disgusting but oddly effective, as the maggots eat only dead tissue. A knight with persistent headaches is having his head shaved in preparation for cupping, where heated cups will supposedly draw out the evil humours. "Bring more wine," Brother Francis calls out. It serves triple duty as antiseptic, anaesthetic, and final comfort for the dying. The camp supply is running low. It always does after a battle. Tomorrow, there will be negotiations with local merchants, trading precious silver for medical supplies that should have been properly stocked before leaving France. The stream of wounded finally slows as dawn approaches. You've spent hours helping hold men down, fetching supplies, and trying not to think about how easily you could end up on these tables. The medical tent reeks of blood, burnt flesh, and human waste. Pain has a way of loosening all bodily controls. Outside, you gulp the relatively fresh air and notice your hands are shaking. Not from fear, exactly, but from the accumulated stress of watching men reduced to meat for the surgeons to butcher. This is the reality behind the glorious songs, broken bodies, amputated limbs, and the knowledge that a minor wound in this environment can mean an agonizing death. The bell for Lauds rings before you've managed to get back to sleep, and you realize with a groan that it's Sunday. That means extended religious services, because apparently God needs extra attention when you're busy killing in His name. You drag yourself from your pallet, noting that Thomas is already up and laying out your cleanest tunic, which is like saying your least filthy rag. Sunday Mass in a Crusader camp is a study in contradictions. Here you are, an army that spent yesterday planning how to slaughter Muslims more efficiently, now gathering to celebrate the Prince of Peace. The cognitive dissonance should be staggering, but somehow everyone manages to compartmentalize. The priests certainly help with that, preaching sermons that would make Christ Himself scratch his head in confusion. The Mass is held in an open field, since no structure could hold the entire army. A makeshift altar has been erected on a slight rise, decorated with captured Saracen banners turned backwards to show disrespect. The irony of using your enemy's possessions to glorify your God seems lost on everyone but you. Knights arrange themselves by rank, as usual, even before God. Social hierarchy must be maintained. Father Guillaume leads the service, his voice carrying across the assembled multitude with the help of good acoustics and a lifetime of practice. He's wearing his finest vestments, somehow kept pristine despite months of campaign. The gold thread catches the morning sun, creating an impressive display that's meant to remind everyone of the church's glory. It mostly reminds you of how much that outfit cost, enough to feed a village for a year. Brothers in Christ, he bellows, launching into a sermon that twists scripture like a contortionist. As David slew Goliath, so shall we smite the infidel. As Moses parted the Red Sea, God parts the enemy before our righteous swords. You mouth along with the Latin responses, understanding maybe half of what you're saying. Most knights know the Paternoster, the Ave Maria, and a few other prayers by rote, but actual comprehension of church Latin is rare. You remember your old priest back home trying to teach you, giving up when you kept conjugating amo as I am a table. Still, you know enough to recognize when Father Guillaume is being creative with his translations. The sermon reaches its crescendo with promises of immediate paradise for those who fall in battle. Your sins are already forgiven, he declares. Each Saracen you strike down opens wider the gates of heaven. Kill one, and 1,000 days are struck from your time in purgatory. Kill 10, and the Virgin herself will welcome you into paradise. This spiritual arithmetic is news to you, but the crowd eats it up. Men who haven't been to confession in years suddenly feel holy. You catch the eye of Sir Marcus, who you know for a fact robbed 3 Christian merchants last week, now nodding along like he's St. Francis himself. The hypocrisy is thick enough to cut with a sword. Communion presents its own challenges. 1 priest, 2 assistants, and several thousand men who need the sacrament. The line moves with glacial slowness as each man receives the host. The communion wine is better than what you usually drink, which leads to some nights trying to get seconds. A scuffle breaks out when someone accuses another of taking too large a sip, because nothing says body of Christ like punching someone over wine allocation. After the formal mass comes confession, and the priests are overwhelmed. Makeshift confessionals, really just priests sitting on stools with a bit of cloth for privacy, spring up around the field. The line for Father Antonio is shortest because he gives the harshest penances. Father Michel's is longest because he's half deaf and gives the same 3 Hail Marys for everything from blasphemy to murder. You wait your turn. mentally cataloguing your sins. It's been 2 weeks since your last confession, and the list is substantial. Anger, constant. Gluttony when food is available. Sloth every morning. Envy of everyone with better equipment. And those impure thoughts about the washerwomen. Plus that incident with the dice. The creative cursing when your armor got stuck. And possibly some light heresy when you questioned whether God really cared about recovering Jerusalem. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. You begin when your turn comes. Father Felipe looks exhausted already, and it's only mid-morning. You rattle off your sins with practiced efficiency. I've taken the Lord's name in vain approximately, many times. I've harbored hatred in my heart for my fellow Christians, specifically Sir Robert, who snores like a demon. I've had impure thoughts about, yes. Father Philippe interrupts. We all have those. Continue. The confession winds on. A grocery list of minor transgressions that seem absurdly petty, given that you're here to wage war. But the forms must be observed. Father Philippe assigns you 20 paternosters and 10 Ave Marias, which is his standard penance for everything short of murder. You suspect he's not really listening anymore. The religious obligations continue with special prayers for victory, blessings of weapons, because nothing says thou shalt not kill like holy water on your sword, and a procession around the camp with holy relics. The prized possession is a fragment of the true cross, carried in a golden reliquary by the Bishop of Accra. Historians debate whether any of these relics were genuine. You just wonder how many pieces of the true cross are floating around, because you've seen enough fragments to build a ship. Between services, theological debates break out among the more educated knights are, does killing an infidel count as murder? No, according to church doctrine. Can you eat meat on Friday if it's the only food available? Yes, but you should feel bad about it. Is it a sin to profit from ransoming prisoners? Technically, yes. Practically, no. The mental gymnastics required to reconcile Christian teaching with crusading reality would impress a Byzantine philosopher. The Templars and Hospitallers hold their own services, more austere and disciplined than the general mass. Their warrior-monk lifestyle fascinates and repels you in equal measure. They've taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, yet they're the most effective killers in the army. The contradiction doesn't seem to bother them. They've achieved a level of cognitive dissonance that borders on art. As the day wears on, the religious fervour gives way to more practical concerns. Sunday is also market day, when local merchants are allowed into camp to sell their wares. The same priests who just preached about the perfidy of the infidel now haggle with Muslim traders over the price of dates. Commerce, it seems, transcends religious boundaries. You find yourself in the scribe's tent, a luxury available only because your family pooled resources to hire Brother Benedict, a monk who can actually read and write. He set up shop under a patched canvas that provides minimal shade, his portable writing desk covered with parchment, quills, and a precious bottle of ink that he guards like a holy relic. What shall we tell them this time, my lord? Benedict asks, his tone suggesting he's heard every possible variation of, I'm fine, send money, over the past months. His fingers are permanently stained black from ink, and his squint has worsened from writing in terrible light conditions. You dictate slowly, aware that each word costs money. Parchment is expensive, and Benedict charges by the line. To my beloved mother, I pray this letter finds you in good health. The formula is always the same, a template of platitudes that reveals nothing of your actual situation. You can't tell her about the dysentery, the fear, The growing doubt that this whole enterprise is a massive mistake. Instead, you craft fiction. Tell her I'm well. You continue. Though your definition of well has shifted dramatically. Well means not actively dying. Well means you kept down breakfast. Well means the wound on your leg hasn't gone septic yet. Tell her I've distinguished myself in battle. This is technically true. You survived, which distinguishes you from those who didn't. Benedict scratches away with his quill, occasionally tutting at your grammar. He suggests embellishments, little flourishes that make your mundane survival sound heroic. The skirmish, where you mostly tried not to soil yourself, becomes a glorious victory against overwhelming odds. The infected cut on your arm becomes a badge of honor earned in service to Christ. Around you, other knights dictate their own creative interpretations of reality. Sir Guillaume is describing a battle that you're pretty sure he wasn't even present for. Young Thomas is having a love letter written to a girl he's never actually spoken to, based entirely on a glimpse of her at a feast 2 years ago. The stories we tell home are more fantasy than the romances of Arthur. Should I mention your need for funds? Benedict asks delicately. This is the real purpose of most letters. Begging for money without sounding like you're begging. Crusading is expensive. Your equipment needs constant repair. Horses die or go lame. And everything in the Holy Land costs 3 times what it should. The spiritual rewards may be great, but the financial costs are ruinous. Say that opportunities for glory abound, but require proper equipment to seize, you suggest. Benedict nods approvingly. He's translated worse euphemisms, and perhaps mentioned that a small donation to the church here would ensure extra prayers for Father's soul. Guilt is a powerful motivator, especially when wielded by a son thousands of miles away. The letter-writing process reveals the harsh reality of medieval literacy. Of the dozens of knights in your company, maybe 5 can read more than their own names. Fewer still can write. This makes men like Benedict powerful. They're the gatekeepers of communication, privy to everyone's secrets and lies. You notice he keeps a separate ledger, probably recording the choicest gossip for his own purposes. Any word from home, you ask? Though you know it's unlikely. Letters travel at the speed of whoever's carrying them. Merchant caravans, returning pilgrims, ships that may or may not reach their destination. You sent your last letter 4 months ago, if you're lucky. It might reach France by Christmas. A reply could take another 6 months, assuming your family can find someone trustworthy to carry it. The illiteracy problem extends beyond personal correspondence. Orders have to be verbal or relayed through the few who can read. Maps are rare and often wildly inaccurate. You've seen Jerusalem placed everywhere from Egypt to Constantinople, depending on the cartographer's imagination. Most navigation is done by landmark and local guide, which explains why you keep getting lost. Shall I read it back to you? Benedict offers, and you nod. He clears his throat and begins, transforming your halting dictation into flowing prose. It sounds like someone else's life, a noble knight having grand adventures in exotic lands, not a tired, hungry man who'd trade his sword for a decent meal and a real bed. The public nature of letter writing means no real privacy. Everyone knows everyone else's business because we're all dictating to the same few scribes. You learn that Sir Robert's wife is pregnant, possibly not by him, given the timeline, that young Pierre's father has died leaving debts, that Count Baldwin is negotiating a marriage for his daughter to secure more funding. The scribe's tent is like a confessional without the promise of secrecy, Payment is always awkward. Benedict charges by the letter, plus extra for materials, plus a donation to his monastery. You hand over silver coins that could buy a week's worth of food, trying not to think about the economics of it all. Back home, this money could hire a labourer for a month. Here, it buys you a single page of lies to comfort your mother. When might we expect replies? Someone asks, voicing what everyone's thinking. Benedict shrugs. Predicting mail delivery in the 12th century is like predicting the weather, only less accurate. Ships sink, caravans get raided, messengers decide that your letter isn't worth the dangerous journey. You're shooting arrows into the dark and hoping they land somewhere useful. The language barrier adds another layer of complexity. Your letter is in French, but it might need to be translated along the way, into Latin for church courier services, into Italian if it goes through Venice, possibly into Arabic if it travels overland through Muslim territories. Each translation is a chance for meanings to shift, for crucial information to be lost or altered. By the time your mother reads it, if she ever does, it might bear little resemblance to what you actually said. Some knights have given up on letters entirely, planning to tell their stories in person if they survive. Others write constantly, pouring out their hearts to Benedict's expensive parchment as if words could bridge the impossible distance between here and home. You fall somewhere in the middle, writing when you can afford it, trying to maintain some connection to a world that feels increasingly unreal. As you leave the tent, Brother Benedict is already greeting his next customer. Quill poised to transform another night's mundane reality into epic fiction. The pile of completed letters sits sealed with wax, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to attempt the journey back to Europe. You've done what you can, sent your words into the void and hoped they'll find their target. Don't forget, Benedict calls after you. Tuesday is for copying wills, very reasonable rates. The reminder sends a chill through you despite the heat. Nothing quite says confident in victory, like making sure your will is up to date. But that's another service Benedict provides, helping illiterate knights ensure their families get something if they don't make it home. The scribe's tent deals in equal parts hope and fatalism, love letters and last testaments, lies for the living and truths for the dead. The dice clatter across the wooden board, and you watch your last decent dagger disappear into Sir Robert's growing pile of winnings. It's evening, that dead time between dinner and sleep, when the mind needs distraction from tomorrow's possibility of death. Around the small fire, 8 knights huddle over various games of chance, wagering items they can't afford to lose on outcomes they can't control, which, when you think about it, is a perfect metaphor for this entire crusade. Your luck's shit tonight. Robert grins, scooping up the dagger. He's already won 2 belts, a pewter cup, and someone's spare boots. The irony of gambling being a mortal sin while wholesale slaughter is encouraged hasn't escaped anyone, but boredom trumps theology every time. Another round? Asked Pierre, producing a leather cup with dice that are definitely weighted. Everyone knows they're weighted. Pierre knows everyone knows. But we all pretend otherwise because what else is there to do? You could attend evening prayers, but Father Guillaume is giving the same sermon about righteous violence he's given every night this week. The entertainment options in a Crusader camp are limited, to put it mildly. Dice and knuckle bones are the most common, requiring nothing but the implements and a willingness to lose things you need. Chess exists among the educated nobility, though pieces tend to go missing. The White King disappeared last week, and now a carved piece of cheese stands in its place. Card games won't be invented for another century, so you make do with what you have. Tell the one about the merchant's wife again, someone calls out to Jean-Baptiste, the company's unofficial storyteller. He launches into a tale that's definitely not appropriate for mixed company. Not that there is any mixed company, unless you count the washerwomen. And they've heard worse. The story involves improbable anatomy and impossible positions. But it gets laughs, and that's what matters. Storytelling is an art form born of necessity. With no books, who could read them anyway? No musicians, the last minstrel died of flux 2 weeks ago. And no theatrical performances, unless you count Father Guillaume's dramatic sermons. Oral narrative becomes the primary entertainment. The stories range from bawdy jokes to elaborate epics, from true accounts of battles nobody actually witnessed to wild fantasies about what awaits in Jerusalem. I heard, says young Thomas, eager to contribute, that in Jerusalem the streets truly are paved with gold, and there are fountains that flow with wine. The veterans laugh, but not unkindly. Let the boy have his dreams. Reality will crush them soon enough. You've heard similar stories, usually from priests trying to maintain morale. The historical reality, known to anyone who's bothered to ask the local Christians, is that Jerusalem is a city like any other, just with more religious significance and better walls. Music, when it happens, comes from the few instruments that survive the journey. There's a knight from Provence with a hurdy-gurdy, though half the strings are broken. Someone in the German contingent has pipes that sound like a cat being strangled. Occasionally, when enough wine has been consumed, spontaneous singing breaks out, usually hymns that devolve into drinking songs that devolve into wordless shouting. Your turn for watch duty, the sergeant reminds you, interrupting a particularly creative verse about a Saracen's daughter. Guard duty is its own form of entertainment. If you define entertainment as standing in the dark trying not to fall asleep, while imagining every shadow is an enemy assassin, you take your position on the camp's perimeter, spear in hand, trying to look alert. The night sounds of Palestine are alien to your French ears. Different insects, different birds, different everything. That rustling could be wind through dry grass, or it could be Saladin's entire army creeping up on you. The constant uncertainty is exhausting. To pass the time, guards often engage in what could generously be called philosophical discussions. Tonight, your watch partner is Eric, a Danish knight with more scars than teeth and opinions about everything. Why do you think we're really here? He asks, the kind of question that only gets voiced in the dark when no priests are listening. For the glory of God and... Horseshit, he interrupts. You're here for the same reason I am. Younger son, no inheritance, no prospects back home except joining a monastery or brigandage. This, he gestures at the camp, is just brigandage with papal approval. These conversations dance on the edge of heresy, but they're common among the rank and file. The gap between what the church preaches and what you experience daily creates a cognitive dissonance that has to be addressed somehow, even if it's just through whispered doubts in the darkness. The camp followers provide another form of entertainment, though provide might be too gentle a word. The washerwomen, cooks, and various hangers-on include a certain number of women who offer comfort for coin. The church officially condemns this, but practically turns a blind eye. Thousands of young men far from home need some outlet, and better they pay for it than take it by force from locals. The monthly bath day is an event in itself. When the army camps near a water source substantial enough for bathing, rare, there's a mad scramble to wash off weeks of accumulated grime. The resulting scene, hundreds of naked men splashing in a river like pale, hairy children, would be comical if it weren't so desperate. Modesty vanishes along with the dirt, and the water turns black within minutes. Blood sports provide more violent entertainment. Cockfighting is popular, with birds carried along specifically for this purpose. Sometimes captured wildlife gets involved. Someone caught a desert fox last week and tried to make it fight a camp dog, with predictably chaotic results. The betting is fierce, and the participants often end up fighting each other when the animals refuse to perform as expected. Wrestling matches between knights settle disputes and provide spectacle. These aren't formal duels. Those require permission and tend to end badly, but rough contests that usually end with both participants bruised, bloody, and oddly satisfied. You've participated in a few yourself, finding the physical release of grappling almost therapeutic after days of tension. Movement, Eric hisses, and you both tense. But it's just a patrol returning. Giving the password, Acre, tonight, with board efficiency. False alarms are constant, each one jangling nerves already stretched thin. You settle back into watchful boredom. Counting the hours until dawn by the movement of stars, you're still learning to recognize in this foreign sky. The market sprawls before you like a fever dream of colors, smells, and sounds that assault every sense you possess. After months of monotonous camp life, the Syrian bazaar is overwhelming. Silk merchants hawking their wares in melodic Arabic, spice vendors with pyramids of powders you can't identify, and everywhere the press of bodies in the narrow streets. You're here with a small armed party, ostensibly to purchase supplies but really to gawk like the provincial Frenchman you are. Stay together, barks Sir Guillaume, appointed leader of this expedition by virtue of knowing 3 words of Arabic. Yes, no, and something that might mean horse, but could also be a grievous insult to someone's mother. And keep your hands on your purses. The culture shock hits immediately. Back home. Market day is a straightforward affair. You know the merchants. They know you. Everyone agrees that cabbage is cabbage and charges accordingly. Here, nothing is simple. The concept of fixed prices doesn't exist. Everything is a negotiation that feels more like combat than commerce. A rug merchant grabs your sleeve, pulling you toward his stall while rapid-firing prices that descend with suspicious speed. Very good, very good. Special price for Frankish lord. He's practically singing, unrolling carpet after carpet despite your complete lack of interest in floor coverings. The rugs are admittedly beautiful, intricate patterns that would take your village weavers years to replicate. But you need food and medicine, not interior decoration. The food stalls present their own challenges. After months of camp stew, the array of available sustenance is almost painful to contemplate. Fruits you've never seen before pile high in baskets, orange globes with thick skins, purple things that look vaguely obscene, dates so sweet they make your teeth ache. You bite into something the vendor swears is delicious and immediately regret it as fire explodes across your tongue. The locals laugh as you desperately gulp water, which only makes it worse. Milk, drink milk, a helpful bystander suggests through gestures. The camel milk he offers smells like wet dog but does help with the burning. This is how you learn that water spreads the oil that carries spices' heat. Knowledge that would have been useful before you ate what turns out to be a pickled pepper from the depths of hell. The language barrier creates constant confusion. Your interpreter, a local Christian who claims to speak French, seems to be working with an entirely different version of your mother tongue. His translations turn simple requests into elaborate productions. You ask for bread. Somehow this becomes a negotiation for 3 chickens and a dubious talisman against the evil eye. No, you protest. Bread, pain, like this, you mime eating, which the merchant interprets as hunger for everything in his stall. Before you know it, you're the mortified owner of dried fish that smells like death, candied fruits crawling with flies, and something wrapped in leaves that might be cheese or might be an alchemical experiment gone wrong. The locals view you Franks with a mixture of contempt, amusement, and mercantile opportunism. You can't blame them. You're armed foreigners who barely speak the language, sweat constantly in your inappropriate clothing, and clearly have no idea what anything should cost. A child successfully sells Thomas a piece of the true cross. That's obviously date palm, but Thomas is so pleased with his holy relic that no one has the heart to tell him. Medical supplies are the priority, but the apothecary stalls might as well be wizards' workshops for all you understand. Jars of powders, dried creatures, mysterious liquids in colours nature never intended. The medieval pharmacopoeia is a testament to humanity's willingness to try anything once. The proprietor, noting your interest in wound remedies, produces a jar of something he claims will heal any injury. It looks like rendered fat mixed with ground beetles and smells worse. Very strong, very good, he insists through the translator. From ancient recipe, known to Galen himself. Whether Galen actually prescribed rancid beetle paste is doubtful, but you buy some anyway. At this point, you'll try anything that might keep wounds from festering. The transaction involves much haggling, dramatic gestures suggesting you're robbing him blind, and eventually a price that's probably still 3 times what locals pay. The fabric merchants fascinate and frustrate in equal measure. Your surcoat needs replacing. The sun has bleached it to a sad grey, and something, you don't want to know what, has eaten holes in strategic places. The silks are magnificent but wildly impractical for campaign life. You settle on sturdy cotton, marvelling at how light it is compared to wool. The merchant throws in a small square of silk for your lady, which makes the other knights laugh, since your last romantic encounter was with a tavern wench who stole your purse. Religious differences create awkward moments. You reach for purchase with your left hand, the toilet hand, as you belatedly remember, and the merchant recoils like you've offered him plague. Eating while walking offends some sensibility you don't understand. The call to prayer rings out, and suddenly half the market is prostrating, while you stand there like confused scarecrows, unsure whether standing still or moving would be more offensive. Don't stare, Guillaume hisses, as veiled women pass. But how can you not? In France, women show their faces and cover their hair. Here, it's reversed, and those eyes peering above face veils seem to be laughing at your confusion. One bold matron catches you gawping and says something that makes her companions giggle. You suspect you've just been insulted in ways your mother would faint to hear. The beggar situation is heartbreaking and annoying by turns. Crippled men display war wounds that make your stomach turn. Children with deliberately maimed limbs tug at your sleeves. And everyone has a brother, cousin, friend who can get you whatever you need for just a few more coins. Your Christian charity wars with the certainty you're being scammed. You toss coins to a blind man who thanks you profusely, then watch him count them with suspicious accuracy. As the day wears on, the cultural overload becomes exhausting. Every transaction is a battle, every interaction a potential misunderstanding. You've acquired a bizarre collection of goods, some useful, many not, all overpriced. Your feet hurt from the unfamiliar cobblestones. Your head spins from the incense and spices. And you're pretty sure that friendly merchant who patted your back actually picked your pocket. The fever starts 3 days after the market visit. You wake drenched in sweat, more than usual, with your bowels cramping like someone's twisting a knife in your gut. The latrine run that follows is the first of many, and by noon you're too weak to make it that far, reduced to squatting behind your tent like a sick dog. Welcome to the Crusader's most faithful companion, dysentery. It's the water, groaned Sir Marcus from his pallet, where he's been laid up for a week, or the food, or the air, or God's judgment. Take your pick. The medical tent is overflowing, literally, in some cases. Brother Francis and his assistants move between patients with the weary efficiency of men who've seen every possible way the human body can rebel. The smell is indescribable, a mixture of diarrhea, vomit, infected wounds, and the peculiar sweetness of flesh beginning to rot. You breathe through your mouth and immediately regret it as you taste the miasma. Another flux case, Brother Francis notes, without looking up from the knight whose wound he's packing with wine-soaked cloth. Third row. Find an empty space if you can. The empty space you find is recently vacated. The straw still bears the outline and stains of its previous occupant. You collapse onto it, past caring about hygiene. Your neighbour, a sergeant from Burgundy, is delirious with fever, muttering about demons made of sand. On your other side, a knight vomits into a bucket that should have been emptied hours ago. Disease spreads through the camp like wildfire through dry grass. The latrines contaminate the water supply. The water contaminates the food, and the cycle continues. Historians estimate that disease killed more crusaders than all the Saracen armies combined, and lying here in your own filth, you believe it. This isn't the glorious death in battle the priest promised. This is shitting yourself to death while crying for your mother. The treatments range from useless to actively harmful. Brother Francis prescribes a purgative to cleanse the bad humours, which seems counterproductive when your body is already purging everything violently. The resulting accelerated dehydration probably kills more men than the disease itself. For fever, there's bloodletting, because apparently losing blood helps when you're already weak. The logic escapes you, but questioning medical authority isn't done. Try this, Thomas offers, producing a foul-smelling potion he bought from a local wise woman. It contains ingredients you don't want to know about, but desperation overrides disgust. You choke it down and spend the next hour vomiting with renewed vigor. Whether that's the disease or the cure is anyone's guess. The camp's attempts at quarantine are laughable. Sick men are supposed to stay in the medical area, but there's no enforcement and nowhere near enough space. Plus, by the time symptoms show, you've already been spreading whatever you have for days. The healthy and sick mingle freely, sharing cups, breathing the same fetid air, accelerating the spread of every pestilence Palestine has to offer. You develop the telltale signs of what the locals call Frankish fever, probably typhoid, though medieval medicine doesn't distinguish between the various ways to die from bad water. The headaches feel like your skull is splitting. The fever brings hallucinations of home, and the rose-colored spots on your chest look almost pretty if you ignore what they mean. I saw my wife last night, Marcus confides during a lucid moment. Clear as day, standing right there. She told me I'm a fool for coming here. He laughs, which turns into coughing, which turns into blood-flecked spittle. She's been dead 2 winters. Maybe she's waiting for me. The social hierarchy dissolves in the medical tent. Knights lie next to common soldiers, united in misery. That proud count, who wouldn't acknowledge your existence, now moans for water, just like everyone else. Disease is the great equalizer, caring nothing for rank or piety. The Archbishop himself spent 3 days here last month, proving that even God's representatives aren't immune to Palestine's plagues. Survival becomes a matter of luck and constitution. Some men recover quickly, bouncing back with renewed appetite. Others linger for weeks, wasting away until they're skeletal shadows of themselves. You fall somewhere in the middle, sick enough to wish for death, not quite sick enough to achieve it. The fever breaks after 5 days, leaving you weak as a newborn but alive. You're lucky, Brother Francis says during his rounds. Lost 12 last night. The bloody flux is getting worse. 12 men who survived the journey here, who might have survived battle, dead from microscopic enemies they couldn't see or understand. Their bodies are burned rather than buried, even in death. Disease must be fought. The smoke from the pyres adds another layer to the camp's perpetual miasma. Recovery is slow and uncertain. You can keep down water, then thin gruel, then actual food that tastes like ash in your mouth. Your first attempt at standing results in immediate collapse. Legs too weak to support even your reduced weight. Thomas helps you practice walking, a few steps at a time, like teaching a child. The recurring nature of camp diseases means you're never truly well. You recover from dysentery only to catch whatever respiratory plague is making the rounds. Recover from that, and it's back to intestinal distress. The cycle continues, each bout leaving you weaker, more susceptible to the next. Some men develop chronic conditions, perpetual flux that never quite goes away, recurring fevers that strike without warning. The strong survive. Officers tell you, as if strength is a moral virtue rather than random genetic luck. The truth is that survival has little to do with strength and everything to do with chance. Did you drink from the wrong water source? Stand downwind of the wrong latrine? Share a cup with someone in the early stages of something fatal? Every day is a gamble with stakes you can't afford to lose. The psychological toll compounds the physical. Nothing breaks a man's spirit quite like soiling himself in front of his peers, like being too weak to stand for prayers, like watching strong men reduced to whimpering children by invisible enemies. The glorious crusade becomes a struggle just to survive until tomorrow, and tomorrow looks exactly like today, hot, miserable, and full of new ways to die. You eventually rejoin your unit, pounds lighter and years older in experience. The knowing looks from other survivors say everything. We've all been there. We all understand. We're all just waiting for the next plague to strike. Because in the Holy Land, it's not a question of if you'll get sick, but when and with what, and whether you'll survive it this time. The siege of Acre has dragged on for 2 months now, and you've come to understand that siege warfare is mostly a euphemism for sitting around waiting for something to happen. Your section of the siege line faces a particularly uninspiring stretch of wall, pockmarked from catapult stones but stubbornly intact. The initial excitement of surrounding a great city has long since given way to the grinding boredom of medieval investment warfare. Your daily routine has become mind-numbing in its repetition. Wake before dawn. Check that the enemy hasn't magically disappeared overnight. Stand guard while engineers fill in another few feet of the defensive ditch. Eat terrible food. Stand more guard. Sleep. Repeat. Occasionally, very occasionally, something happens. A sortie from the city. A lucky catapult shot. A mine collapse. But mostly, it's just waiting. I joined this crusade to fight, grumbles Sir Pierre, using his sword to dig lice from his armour's padding, not to become a very expensive scarecrow. The siege camp has evolved into a semi-permanent city of its own, complete with markets, brothels, and all the dysfunction of urban life. Trenches snake toward the walls in zigzag patterns designed to protect against arrow fire. Siege towers rise like wooden skyscrapers, taking weeks to build and minutes to burn when the defenders get lucky with Greek fire. The whole operation has the feeling of an extremely violent construction project. Your section's current task involves protecting the sappers, specialized miners who tunnel under the walls to collapse them. These madmen work in conditions that make your worst day look pleasant. Cramped tunnels, constant cave-in risk, and the knowledge that enemy counterminers are digging to meet them. Sometimes you hear the underground fights, muffled screams, and the clash of metal in the earth's bowels. They broke through yesterday, reports Thomas, who's been talking to the engineer's assistants. Found each other 20 feet down. They fought with knives and picks in a space too small to swing a sword. Our boys won, but Jean the Mole took a pick through the eye. The tedium is punctuated by moments of extreme violence. Last week, the defenders sorted just as you were nodding off on watch. Suddenly, the gates burst open and mounted warriors poured out, scattering the siege works and killing a dozen men before anyone knew what was happening. You barely got your helmet on before a Saracen rider nearly took your head off. The fight lasted maybe 10 minutes, but your hands shook for hours afterward. The psychological warfare is constant. The defenders know they're outnumbered but not outmatched in patience. They taunt from the walls in broken French, making creative suggestions about your mothers and questioning your manhood. Sometimes they display captured crusaders, torturing them within sight but beyond bow range. The screams carry clearly on still nights. Don't look, veterans advise. But how can you not? That could be you up there tomorrow, discovering how many ways the human body can be made to suffer while remaining alive. The priests say martyrdom guarantees paradise, but watching a man being flayed makes you question whether any reward is worth that price. Boredom breeds innovation in entertainment. Someone has constructed a crude ballista that launches dead cats into the city. Psychological warfare of the pettiest kind. Gambling reaches new heights of creativity. Betting on which section of wall will be hit by the next catapult stone. How many men will die this week? Whether the latrine diggers will hit bedrock. You've seen men wager their salvation on a roll of dice, literally betting years off their purgatory, as promised by the priests, against earthly goods. The siege engines provide their own spectacular failures. You watched a massive trebuchet, pride of the French contingent, shake itself apart on its third shot. The arm whipped around with tremendous force, missed the pivot, and sent 100-pound stones raining down on our own lines. 3 men died, crushed by projectiles meant for the enemy. The engineer was flogged, though it's unclear how that will improve his next design. Mining operations create surreal situations. You're standing guard over a mine entrance when the ground suddenly collapses 50 yards away. Men, siege equipment, and an entire command tent disappear into a crater. Turns out our miners miscalculated and undermined our own position. The hole becomes a new latrine pit. Might as well get some use from it. At least we're not in the tunnels. You console yourself, watching dirty, exhausted miners emerge like moles from hell. They're paid specialists, not knights, and they earn every coin. The stories they tell would give you nightmares if you weren't already having them. Crawling through spaces barely big enough for a child, shoring up walls with timber while soil rains down, breaking through into enemy tunnels and fighting in absolute darkness. Disease runs rampant in siege camps, worse than on the march. Thousands of men crammed together, poor sanitation, and nowhere to move when plague strikes. The siege fever starts in the Genoese quarter and spreads faster than Greek fire. Men burn with fever, rave about home, and die with their eyes fixed on walls they'll never breach. The defenders probably just have to wait for disease to do their work for them. The few successful assaults are nightmares of their own. You participated in one last month, scaling ladders against a section of damaged wall. The first men up die automatically, swept off by defenders who've had weeks to prepare. You're in the third wave, climbing over bodies of men you ate breakfast with. A pot of boiling oil misses you by inches, cooking the man behind you inside his armor. You make the wall, fight for minutes that feel like hours, then retreat when reinforcements fail to arrive. 27 dead, 40 wounded, gain nothing. The after-action report states with brutal simplicity, those 27 men died for absolutely no change in the strategic situation. Tomorrow you'll try again, or the next day, or next month. The walls don't care about your timeline. Negotiations happen constantly, not for surrender, but for practical matters. 3-hour truces to collect the dead. Agreements about poisoning water supplies, generally frowned upon by both sides. Prisoner exchanges. You're killing each other professionally, but certain standards must be maintained. It's oddly civilized for such a brutal business. The Crusader camps develop their own bitter humor. Why did we come all this way to sit in the mud? Becomes a running joke. Someone suggests building a bridge back to France over the corpses. At this rate, we'll have enough materials. The younger knights still talk about glory and honor. The veterans just talk about surviving long enough to see home again. As weeks turn to months, the siege becomes its own world. You know every stone in your section of wall, every face in your unit, every smell in the camp. The actual purpose, taking the city, becomes almost abstract. You're here because you're here, fighting because that's what you do, waiting for something to change because what else is there? The plunder begins before the last defender falls from the walls. You're swept along with the tide of armored bodies pouring through the breach. Your moral qualms drowned out by months of frustration and the mob mentality that turns individual men into a singular beast. Acre is yours, and now comes the part no one talks about in the heroic songs, dividing the spoils of a conquered city. The first rule of medieval looting is speed. You have maybe 2 hours before the great lords establish order and claim the best prizes for themselves. Your group splits up with practiced efficiency. Pierre and Marcus head for the merchant quarter. Thomas stays to guard whatever you capture, and you make for what looks like a wealthy district. The streets are chaos. Defenders still fighting desperate rearguard actions. Civilians fleeing, and crusaders drunk on victory and actual wine from the first taverns they find. You kick in the door of a promising house and find a family huddled in the corner, merchant class by their clothing. Probably Christian Arabs who've been living under Muslim rule. The terror in their eyes makes you pause. These aren't soldiers. They're just people who happen to live in the wrong city at the wrong time. But pause too long and another group will claim the house. So you motion for them to leave quickly. They scatter, and you try not to think about what happens to them in the streets. The house yields decent rewards. A small chest of silver coins. Byzantine, but silver is silver. Silk clothing that will sell well, and what might be valuable spices. You can't read the Arabic labels, so you taste carefully. Saffron, worth more than gold by weight. You stuff your pack while Thomas guards the door against other looters. The unspoken rule is that once you've claimed a house, it's yours. But rules become flexible when treasure's involved. Kitchen, you shout. remembering that wealthy families often hide valuables in everyday places. Sure enough, buried in the grain storage is a leather pouch of gold dinars. The previous owners were smart, but not smart enough. You feel a twinge of guilt. This might have been their entire life savings. But war is expensive, and you need to recoup costs somehow. The moral complexity of looting hits you when you enter what's clearly a scholar's room. Books in Arabic, astronomical instruments, medical texts with detailed drawings. This isn't just theft, it's cultural destruction. But books don't pay for new armor, so you leave them for someone who cares about such things. Later, you'll hear the Hospitallers collected many texts for their libraries, knowledge preserved, even if stolen. Outside, the scene has degenerated into pure chaos. Drunk crusaders stagger under loads of plunder. Arguments break out over claimed buildings. You see two knights from different companies literally dueling over a goldsmith shop. Bodies litter the streets. Some defenders, some civilians caught in the wrong place, some crusaders who got too greedy and let their guard down. The systematic nature of medieval looting would impress modern efficiency experts. Groups work in coordination, some searching, others guarding, runners taking valuable items back to secure areas. The Templars and Hospitallers are notably disciplined, marking their claimed areas and methodically stripping them of value. Regular knights like you must work faster and less thoroughly. The slavers are already setting up, Thomas reports, disgusted. The slave trade is the dirty secret of crusading. Captured Muslims bring good prices, especially skilled craftsmen or attractive women. You've avoided this particular sin so far, partly from squeamishness and partly because slaves are hard to transport and feed. But you see fellow Christians herding groups of captives toward holding areas, already calculating profits. The religious justification for plunder requires mental gymnastics. These people are infidels, the priests say. So taking their property is reclaiming it for Christendom. The fact that many are actually Eastern Christians who look and dress like Muslims is conveniently ignored. God wills it, apparently, that you stuff your pockets with other people's life savings. By afternoon, some organization emerges. Lords establish collection points where knights must declare their plunder for taxation. Yes, even looting is taxed. You underreport, obviously, keeping the best pieces hidden. Everyone does it, and everyone knows everyone does it. But the forms must be observed. A tenth goes to the church, a fifth to your lord, and various other deductions that would make a Byzantine tax collector proud. 53 silver pieces, various spices, silk cloth. You declare to the board clerk recording plunder. You don't mention the gold dinars sewn into your armor padding or the small ruby you found in a child's toy box. The clerk doesn't press. He's probably skimming too. The entire system runs on organized dishonesty. The arguments over major prizes are spectacular. Who gets the governor's palace? Which lord claims the main mosque for conversion to a church? The Italian merchants fight viciously over waterfront warehouses, pulling contracts and threats in equal measure. You watch Pisan and Genoese traders almost come to blows over a soap factory. The sacred mission of reclaiming the Holy Land, reduced to squabbling over commercial real estate. Your successful looting brings unexpected problems. How do you transport this wealth? Your spices need proper containers or they'll spoil. The silks must be protected from moisture. The coins need hiding from both enemies and friends. A wealthy knight attracts attention from tax collectors, thieves, and lords looking for loans. Success breeds its own complications. We should send some home, Thomas suggests, ever practical. But how? Entrusting valuable goods to merchants requires trust you can't afford. The Templars offer banking services but take a hefty cut. You could wait for a returning ship. But sailors are notoriously light-fingered. Every option risks losing what you've risked your life to gain. The human cost becomes apparent as the frenzy dies down. You pass a mosque where civilians took shelter, now broken open like an egg, the scenes inside. You've seen battle deaths, but this is different. This is what happens when armed men meet unarmed families. An old imam lies across his Quran, died defending a book from men who can't even read it. Children's toys scattered among adult bodies tell their own stories. This is wrong, Thomas says quietly, and you can't disagree. But what's the alternative? Return empty-handed to France, bankrupt and humiliated? Let others take what you won't? The pragmatism of survival wars with whatever Christian morality you retain. In the end, pragmatism wins. It always does. The official victory celebrations feel hollow. Te Deum sung in a hastily consecrated church. Thanks given for God's favor in delivering the city. No mention of the thousands dead, the families destroyed, the generations of coexistence shattered. Just praise for Christian triumph and anticipation of the next conquest. You mouth the words, mind on your hidden gold and whether you'll live to spend it. The ship's deck rolls beneath your feet as you stand at the rail, watching the coast of Palestine fade into morning mist. After 3 years, you're finally going home, or what's left of you is. The man gripping the ship's rail bears little resemblance to the eager knight who left France full of dreams of glory. You're 30 pounds lighter, scarred in body and soul, and rich enough to never speak of how you earned it. The voyage home is its own ordeal. Your ship, a Genoese merchant vessel pressed into pilgrim service, creaks ominously with every wave. You're crammed into the hold with 200 other returning crusaders, wounded men, and those who've simply had enough. The smell below decks, unwashed bodies, festering wounds, and vomit drives you topside despite the cold spray. Never thought I'd miss that army camp, jokes Sir Marcus, though his humour can't hide the tremor in his hands. He's been shaking since the siege of Acre, some invisible wound that no surgeon can heal. You've seen it before, men who function normally until they don't, who wake screaming from nightmares they can't remember, who jump at shadows that might be Saracen assassins. The physical toll is easier to catalogue. Your left knee, twisted during a skirmish, aches constantly and predicts weather better than any almanac. 2 fingers on your right hand don't bend properly after being crushed in a shield wall. The scar across your ribs pulls tight when you breathe deeply. Various tropical diseases have left their marks, recurring fevers, digestive issues that make eating an adventure, skin conditions that no amount of washing improves. But it's the invisible wounds that worry you most. The things you've seen, done, and allowed to happen have changed something fundamental. You find yourself constantly checking shadows, hand moving to where your sword should be. Loud noises make you flinch. The sight of fire brings back memories of Greek fire consuming men in their armor, screaming as they cook alive. How do you explain that to people who think war is glorious? What will you tell them? Asked Thomas, now more friend than squire, after all you've survived together. The question haunts every returning crusader. How do you describe the indescribable? The official story will be of Christian victory, of brave knights reclaiming holy sites. The truth of disease, misery, moral compromise, and the banality of survival doesn't fit the narrative. You've already started crafting your story during the long voyage. The siege of Acre becomes a tale of heroism rather than months of boredom punctuated by terror. The battles emphasize courage over chaos. You'll mention the heat and disease as obstacles overcome, not the primary enemies they were. No one wants to hear how you spent more time squatting over latrines than fighting infidels. The other passengers share their own planned narratives. Young Pierre, who lost an eye to infection, not combat, will claim a Saracen champion took it in single combat. Robert, whose fortune comes mostly from looting Christian merchants, will speak vaguely of rewards for faithful service. Everyone agrees to support each other's stories, a conspiracy of mutual fiction. "I'm staying in Venice," one knight announces. Several men nod agreement. The prospect of returning to provincial life after experiencing the wider world holds little appeal for some. They'll join mercenary companies, seek employment with Italian merchants, or simply disappear into the cosmopolitan chaos of trading cities. Home isn't always where you left it. The wealth you're carrying creates its own anxieties. Hidden in your gear are enough gold coins to buy a small estate, spices worth a fortune if you can get them to market, and silks that will make you wealthy or mark you as a target. You've seen returning crusaders robbed and murdered for less. The last miles home might be the most dangerous of all. Physical readjustment proves challenging. Your body, adapted to constant vigilance and terrible food, rebels against safety and decent meals. The first real bread you eat in Genoa makes you sick, too rich after years of camp fare. Wine tastes wrong without the grit of a dirty cup. You sleep poorly in actual beds, missing the hard ground and ambient noise of 10,000 snoring men. "We're different now," Marcus says one evening, wine loosening his tongue. "I see it in the mirror. We've got the 1,000-yard stare, like old soldiers who've seen too much. My wife won't recognize me. Hell, I don't recognize me." The social readjustment will be worse. You left as minor nobility seeking glory and fortune. You return wealthy but damaged, carrying secrets that would horrify your genteel neighbors. The eager young knights wanting stories of adventure won't understand when you change the subject. The priests seeking edifying tales of Christian triumph won't appreciate your complicated relationship with faith. Some men break on the voyage home. A knight from Toulouse throws himself overboard one night, unable to face return. Another drinks himself into oblivion, muttering about children in the streets of Acre. The chaplain offers comfort. But what comfort exists for men who've done what you've done? Confession helps some, though finding words for your sins proves impossible. "I'll never speak of the worst parts," you decide, and Thomas nods agreement. Let others think what they will. The truth would destroy the comfortable fiction that allows crusading to continue. Better to be thought a hero than known as what you really are, a survivor who did what was necessary and tries not to think about it too much. The coast of Italy offers hope and dread in equal measure. You're closer to home, but also to explaining yourself, to fitting back into a life that continued without you. Letters that reached you spoke of changes, deaths, births, marriages, scandals that seemed important to the writers, but trivial after what you've experienced. How do you pretend to care about local politics when you've seen cities burn? Your dreams are the worst betrayal. Sometimes you're back in the siege lines, sometimes in the chaos of looting, sometimes in moments you've tried to forget. You wake expecting attack, hand reaching for weapons, heart racing from threats that exist only in memory. The other veterans understand. You see them prowling the deck at night, unable to sleep, finding comfort in shared insomnia. "When we get home," Thomas says, I'm going to eat fresh bread, drink clean water, and sleep for a week. You nod, though you know it won't be that simple. Home is a place you left 3 years ago. Whether it still exists, whether you can still fit there, remains to be seen. But the alternative, staying in the East, living among the ghosts, is worse. So you sail on, carrying your secrets and scars back to a world that sent you forth as heroes and must now accept whatever returns. The French coast appears on the horizon like a promise you're not sure you want kept. Soon you'll dock, disperse to your various homes, and begin the process of pretending the last 3 years were something other than what they were. The crusade is over for you, but you suspect you'll carry it for the rest of your days, in aching joints, in nightmare-haunted sleep, in the weight of gold bought with blood. Home, someone whispers, and the word carries all the longing and fear of men who aren't sure they belong anywhere anymore. But it's where you're going, ready or not, to spend the rest of your lives trying to reconcile who you were with who you've become. The crusade ends not with triumph, but with this: damaged men on a creaking ship, sailing back to explain the inexplicable to people who will never understand. The ship's gentle rocking becomes your lullaby as we close this tale of crusading life. Your breathing slows, muscles relaxing, as the vivid scenes of medieval chaos fade into the soft darkness behind your eyelids. The clash of swords grows distant, replaced by the rhythmic sound of waves against wooden hulls. Let the weight of armor slip from your shoulders, the dust of foreign roads settle, the fevered dreams of glory dissolve into peaceful sleep. You're safe now, warm in your bed, far from the harsh realities of history. The stories of knights and battles drift away like morning mist, leaving only quiet restfulness. Your mind releases its hold on those ancient struggles, floating free into gentler dreams. Tomorrow will bring its own stories, but tonight there is only peace, only rest, only the soft embrace of sleep washing over you like a cool stream. The past returns to the past where it belongs, and you sink deeper into tranquil slumber, breathing easy, completely at peace. Sweet dreams carry you through the night, far from the crusades, far from conflict, into the restful darkness where history cannot follow. Sleep now, deep and dreamless, until morning light brings you gently back to your own time, your own life, refreshed and renewed.